it's 48% representativity of white men in top management positions, 13% in white women, 10% in African men, in simply the category of top management in South Africa.
We take the president's brother-in-law, let's not mention the name of the business, but the president is running probably the most valuable business in this country. The whole top echelon is pale and male. I don't think the president's brother-in-law is discriminatory, quite frankly. I think he's taking in people that he's targeted himself. He's appointed his board, and he's saying, these are the people that are going to make me money, and I don't care whether they're black, white, Indian, colored, disabled, or whatever. I don't care.
I want you to diagnose the statistic that in terms of unemployment by demographic in South Africa, black African South Africans have an unemployment rate of more than 30%. White South Africans have an unemployment rate of only 9%. Diagnose that statistic for me.
So you can't tell me they're deliberately not putting in black men or black women or disabled people. That you can't say. Even if you took all the whites in South Africa and you threw them into the sea, which Julius Malema wants to do you think that the economy is going to improve? I don't.
Guys, so this was a really fire conversation between this guy. I really love listening to him a lot, Lester Kiewit, all right, of this Cape Radio. I think this is that's the anyway. He's a radio presenter. I really love listening to him. He has interviewed a lot of people, Julius Malema, Helen, many DA officials anyway, and all of that. But this particular discussion he has with DA Shadow Minister, according to the newsroom journalist the other day, Michael Bagraim, actually unveils a lot of complications and complexities around this whole thing with employment equity, which is shaking South Africa to its core now. I think recently even the court, the DA had to take this case to the court. The court has said it has reserved the judgment. In other words, we don't know how long this reservation could be, but it has reserved the judgment. In other words, it's still in the pipeline. We don't know if the amendment would be passed, although it's argued that, there's actually already been deadlines placed and all that. How long would the DA continue to challenge this in court? Would it be like the 10-year fight that Willie Ockham describes, that the DA has actually been fighting for the for the Citizenship Act to be overturned, so that South Africans who are, stuck abroad can actually, because of the fact that they have dual citizenships, and had to lose their South African citizenry, can actually now come back? Would it be a 10-year fight like that, thereabout? So we really don't know. But the whole case is still ongoing, and it's going to affect businesses. It's going to affect. Bagraim has been discussing about sharing the thought that South Africa has actually now moved, I think, from 33.3% with its official to 42%. And actually, there was one comment, I think, that by a COSATU leader or so, that if you add the youth unemployment, it actually goes to the 70s thereabout. So we're seeing a nation that is full of people unemployed, all right? And it's scary because these people now, they're easy target for radicalization. This is how radicalization begins. When you wake up, you get out into the streets. There's nothing to do, because one thing about a job, people do not understand, a job gives a dignity of essence of being alive, all right? That you can go on a job, even if you're not passionate about a job, but the fact that you go every day to somewhere that helps you measure your utilization of time and the effectiveness of that in productivity and contributing to the progress of the nation. It gives a certain kind of dignity. It's an unspoken kind of dignity that comes, upon a worker or job, a worker, so to speak. And so having this amount of people unemployed in such a country that still has a lot of the violence and all of that, as like South Africa, I think it's not sustainable. So Michael Bagraim now and Lester here are still debating on, the whole thing with too many white bosses at top management positions, how to democratize that and all that. And for me personally, although many times when I think about it, you see, this is a YouTube channel I've been managing for quite some time now. It's almost like a business, and it's challenging, bro. Business is hard. I really applaud many of the South African, especially those who have decided to set up businesses and employ people. I applaud you guys. Business is war. If you listen to, I think there was one mentor I usually listen, Dan Locke. Dan Locke is a guy who is a really powerful business. He speaks about the fact that business is war, and you have to treat business as such. So I applaud you guys who set up companies and employ people. But now to have these quotas and this whole stress and this whole thing with the meeting the sectoral requirements and all that, it could be a challenge. It could be a challenge. And anyway, DA's Bagraim here has actually argued that, you see, those guys at the top management positions in many companies, for example, they have been, there are certain conditions that probably might have been fueled by the conditions of apartheid, but also the fact that their families have been well to do, and they've been able to attain a kind of education that would help them function at that level. But to speak about having those who have been disadvantaged in South Africa to operate at the level of top leadership without the adequate training or education would actually be, sort of like forcing a lot of companies to just eventually just decide to close down and just leave South Africa, because it wouldn't make sense. All right. So I think if I'm listening to them correctly, the DA's argument is that, there had to be more investment now in skilling, putting the right skills. The likes of Musi Maimane, I usually say it all the time on this channel, that he says that many South Africans are not just unemployed, but they are also unemployable. So I think the government of the GNU should now need to embark on a much more forceful, violent strategy of re-educating, rescaling. There's an issue now with AI governance, taking, the world by storm. A lot of people are beginning to speak about how to govern the use of AI. AI is challenging a lot of issues. South Africa could actually be at the forefront of retraining and reskilling these people at the level of AI, because AI is actually, people have even actually called it the fourth industrial revolution. It's a new economy brewing, all right? So this is an opportunity to now start rescaling people for a kind of economy that will be dominated by AI, as long as the right governance program. And I think South Africa, Rwanda are actually most advanced in the rudiments and discussions around this whole thing with governing AI. So that whole thing with reskilling this youth, for example, putting skills in their hands, like the youth in Kenya. When I speak to the youth in Kenya, bro, those guys are crazy. They are skilled, technical skills, technological skills. All right. So the youth, because we're moving into a technological future, right? Even though the likes of Botswana speak about a post-diamond future. All right. Yes, it's a post-diamond future. Yes, Botswana. That's where we have the Setswana public-private partnership. All right. So there's a lot of talk anyway of a post-diamond future that has to now work with reskilling young people with digital skills and all. So I think this is where South Africa should be. This is my own personal analysis and diagnosis of the problem. All right, but in trying to bring that up, Lester was trying to really now quote, this whole statistics that, at the level of top management position in many companies, the leadership there is white, the white pale males, according to Bagraim, all right, and that he argues that there should be a democratization at that level. Then Bagraim tries to really restore that, even the president's brother-in-law, I don't know if maybe this will now be Motsepe, or I don't know which one anyway, but he argues that that particular brother-in-law has employed or hired white pale males to control the business operations at that level, because they have the skills and the talents and all of that, the required skills to help the company grow. And this is the same argument I'm saying. So it starts from skills. I think the strategy should shift now more, rather than arguing about, how to democratize, in terms of race and all of that. Probably there should now be a much more forceful investment in skills training, so that there can be healthy competition. I know it's going to be difficult, because I know the whites and the Indians, if you remember the former statistician General Lehotla on this channel, I made a video. I think I'm making a video again on him soon, because he had a really interesting interview with Sizwe Mpofu-Welch, and arguing about the whole differences between the races and what happened in, I don't know if this was now 1958, when the Indians also had a different strategy and started now trying to educate their people in mass. And so that's why we see the disparity in education, between the whites and the Indians, and then the blacks and the coloreds, all right? So there has to be a kind of strategy now to now help these blacks and coloreds in terms of reskilling, all right, to raise up their skills level, so that at the end of the day, there can be healthy competition, and then at the end of the day, we might not even have to bother about, democratizing top leadership or even central middle leadership, whatever. A healthy competition would just simply redirect the flow of resources, flow of skills, flow of productivity, and lead to a much more, better productivity in. So this is just Kwazemy now, my own analysis, and just in my own common head, trying to really see how. But I know these are challenging issues. But let's quickly listen to Lester and Bagraim discuss about this whole issue, about how even the president's brother-in-law had to hire white pale males to function at top management position in their really large companies, which speaks to the fact that the whole thing with the Equity Amendment Act might actually be problematic. And I'll share your thoughts in the comments.
Today in the South Gauteng High Court, the DA launching its constitutional challenge to Section 15A of the Employment Equity Amendment Act, introducing targets within the workplace. It's a campaign that started 2 years ago during the 6th Parliament, but now goes to court, and the DA arguing that the Employment Equity Amendment Act discriminates unfairly and is unconstitutional. But what is the Employment Equity Amendment Act? Well, companies with 50 employees or more will now have to meet new minimum diversity targets. Different industries have their own set of targets, which include race and gender breakdowns. But there are no official targets or quotas. This is according to the Act. While there are no fixed racial quotas for each group, companies must create their own targets based on national or provincial demographics. There are, of course, exemptions for smaller companies. Companies with fewer than 50 employees do not have to comply with these targets, but also introduces for the first time fines for non-compliance. Companies that fail to meet targets could face fines for potentially up to 2.7 million rand, or 10% of their turnover. Michael Bagraim is the Democratic Alliance's spokesperson on Labour. Good morning, Michael. Really appreciate your time. Watched the DA's press conference yesterday. Unfortunately, the TV news channels turned away when you started because they just wanted to hear Helen Ziller. I wanted to hear from you because you sit in the committee and you've been working and been part of this process. But what will be the DA's pitch to the courts today, and why you find these amendments unconstitutional?
Well, it's quite simply that 15A has set the targets, and they're cast in stone. The minister has now set the targets, regardless of what the situation is. It's cast in stone. It doesn't help to say you set your own targets, because they have to reach that target, otherwise they will get those fines. In fact, many of the businesses, the bigger businesses, are telling me that 10% of turnover is more than their profit, so they'd rather than liquidate, and that's a real problem altogether. The reality is that the Constitution is clear. It says there must be redress, and the Democratic Alliance very strongly believes there must be redress, but we've had this legislation in the same, more or less the same format. It's just now making it harsher. More or less the same format now for 27 years. And for 27 years, we've had failure. So you're doing the same experiment again and again, and we hear it each year, and it gets worse and worse. And we are still reflecting pale and male at the top echelons of the business community. And you can't have the same piece of legislation and expect it to be different. Yeah. Now you're just adding a whip to it, and the reality is that the business community is saying, well, we're trying our best. We're doing what we can do. And, if you're now going to add just a fine to it, as opposed to trying to get it right, what we're saying is the onus lies on the minister, on the government, in terms of our Constitution, to show that there is fair discrimination. Now, there is an allowance for fair discrimination in our law, but you have an onus to show that it is fair. Now, to say that you have set quotas, and that's exactly what it is. In fact, the courts have been, all along, have been saying quotas are unconstitutional altogether. The reality is that I don't see how any company has come forward and said, well, we're not employing black people, we're not employing women, we're not going to employ disabled people. And I'll tell you an example of this is where the government itself set a quota for itself for disability employment. This was 7 years ago, We have almost 6% of our active population who are disabled. Almost, I think it's just over 6%. I think those figures come from you, actually. But you are quoting someone else. Now, if that's the case, and they set a target of 3%, well, if you look at government's own employment figures, they're less than 1%. Why? It's not because government's discriminating. I'm hoping not. I don't think they are. They're not discriminating against the disabled community. But what they're doing is they're trying to fit people in. Now, you need people, obviously, that are fit for purpose, and you need to be able to recruit at the correct price, and et cetera, and people who can obviously do the job. Now, I think what's happened here in South Africa is a couple of things. First and foremost is that because of the legacy of apartheid and because of the need for redress, it's become very difficult because everyone's quoting the top echelons and saying, well, it's pale and male, the top echelons. And I agree it is. I mean, you can't argue with the figures. But our education system, to a large degree, has failed us. Our economy is not growing. So if it's not growing, you're not going to change the figures. I don't think government's saying that you have to retrench to make way for the people that we need to employ for the redress. I don't think they're saying that. I hope not. But if they are, that in itself is unconstitutional. So we're challenging 15A. And 15A says that you need to be fair in your discrimination. And if a minister just sets figures, that's not fair. What we have had up until now, and it hasn't worked, is we've said to the business community, you set your own targets, we will test you on your own targets, and at the end of the day, we haven't had redress in the expense that we have.
Yeah.
Now, yesterday I heard from the department, Mr. Maklipi from the department, you've interviewed him a few times, and he says, yes, you're right, but we haven't had very good inspectorate, and we haven't been able to punish the companies properly.
Let me pose this to you, Michael. And you're right. Transformation and redress clauses are rooted in the Constitution. But if you look at the 23-24 Employment Equity report on just the section of top management alone, the private sector, of course, the largest employer in South Africa, it's 48% representativity of white men in top management positions, 13% in white women, 10% in African men, in simply the category of top management in South Africa. If a carrot approach has not worked, surely you need some form of stick approach to try and fast track that. The 2023 report says that South African companies, especially in the private sector, still largely dominated by white men.
Yeah, in that sector, it's absolutely correct. I'm not arguing with the figures, and we do need the redress. But what you're saying is agreeing with me, because we've had that for 27 years. There's not been a carrot. There's no carrot there. We've had employment equity legislation. Every single business wants to do business with government. And if they're not meeting their targets, they can't do business with government. So you can't tell me they're deliberately not putting in black men or black women or disabled people. That you can't say. Lester, I've been practicing labor law for 40 years now. For the last 27 years, I have been practicing labor law during the advent of the Employment Equity Act. Mostly I act for employees. They come to see me. Black, white, Indian, colored, makes no difference. Anyone that can pay me, of course. And they come to see me. I then take cases to the CCMA, the Labor Court, the Equity Court, you name it, I'm happy to go there. The bottom line is, I haven't had more than a handful of cases of people who come to me and say, I've been discriminated against because I'm black, Indian, colored, white, woman. Yes, I've had a few of the disabled, and those people have won their cases, and we've gone, but not a handful have come to me.
So what are companies saying, Michael? Are they saying that we're happy we're actually looking forward to diversifying our workplaces. So
Correct.
they're saying we're not finding sufficient candidates, and would that not be stipulated within the legislation that yes, there would be exemptions if you can prove that you've gone out to market, you've looked for sufficient applicable candidates, and you simply can't find them?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the economy is not growing, and it hasn't grown. Well, you and I both know that the big business, it's very sad to say, but big business is jobless growth. We're living in an era where they're mechanizing, computerizing, outsourcing. That's jobless growth in that big business sector. And we haven't been able to, I'd love to be able to do this, start retrenching people to make way for others, because that would give a lot more work to me. I don't think it'll be fair, and I think it'll be challenged, and we'll have all sorts of other problems there. What I'm saying is we need to do what the Western Cape government is trying to do. Despite the legislation, they're trying to do it. So they brought the unemployment figure down to just below 19%. Nationally, COSATU tells us it's 42%. Now, when you've got an unemployment figure like that and the economy is not growing, you're not going to see massive turnover in the upper echelons. I heard last night that, in fact, the big banks have been quite lucky in that they've managed to, I don't know how they're doing it, they're pushing out their upper echelon, and it's basically reflected black and female in the big banks. We're hearing about that. But I'm not sure how they're getting it right. Maybe they've got employment contracts that have sunset clauses in them. But I mean, we take the president's brother-in-law, let's not mention the name of the business, but the president is running probably the most valuable business in this country. The whole top echelon is pale and male. I don't think the president's brother-in-law is discriminatory, quite frankly. I think he's taking in people that he's targeted himself, he's appointed his board, and he's saying, these are the people that are going to make me money, and I don't care whether they're black, white, Indian, colored, disabled, or whatever. I don't care. My issue here is that we need to grow the economy. We need to improve our education system, because the apartheid education system, which was discriminatory against black people, unfortunately, is still like that. We're still seeing that 30 years later, 31 years later. It's very unfair, because you have people with the past who were able to have families that had money, could go to private institutions, private schools, private universities, and that sort of thing. And we're holding back our black community who don't have that money to go and get that private education. So, look, we've got all sorts of problems. We need to do the hard yards here.
Yeah.
You and I are living in SHIP South Africa together. SHIP South Africa has created a major leak. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. If that ship goes down, we're all going down. And I'm in that boat with you. So, Lester, my problem is we need to somehow deregulate. We need to get what the experiment that's been going on now for just over 8 years in the Western Cape seems to be working, despite some of the negative legislation. And let's not say we want the same blunt tool of employment equity, and especially 15A, and say we're hoping it's going to be better. We haven't got another 27 years to wait.
Michael, running out of time, but I want you to diagnose the statistic that in terms of unemployment by demographic in South Africa, black South Africans have an unemployment rate of more than 30%. White South Africans have an unemployment rate of only 9%. Diagnose that statistic for me.
Well, it's quite simple. It's just what I've said. That the whites, because of the problems of apartheid and because of the legacy that we left with in this country, whites have been able to access private education. They've been when I wanted a job, when I came out of law school, I had parents that could afford to send me to a private school. They could afford to send me to a university. They could then afford, at that point, to say, we're going to grant you the tools to open up your own firm and give me the money. Now, my black colleagues at the university didn't have that benefit. They just didn't have it. So we're still suffering from the legacy of apartheid. Now, the redress is not going to come by saying you need to employ those people, you have to employ them. It's not going to come that way. It hasn't. Every single business, you can't tell me one business that's saying we are here and we're not going to employ any black people, never mind our business. We need to reflect what's happening now. All our neighbors in Southern Africa, their economies are growing and they are reflecting the demographics of their country. There's no employment equity legislation there. How are they doing it? How is Nigeria doing it, for instance? Even if you took all the whites in South Africa and you threw them into the sea, which Julius Malema wants to do you think that the economy is going to improve? I don't see how that's going to happen.
Michael, I have to leave it there, but really appreciate your time. Michael Bagraim.